This is a slightly different format for us.
At the end of the year, why not mix things up? We did an episode when we first moved to London about the things that we've learned. Do you remember that? And it was just like fun little things.
Yes.
And it was one of our most listened to episodes. I was kind of shocked that anyone cared, to be honest.
Oh, yeah.
Like I just remember doing it, being like, is this self-indulgent? Like, does anyone care?
And we were kind of like complaining and then we're like, flights to Europe are so expensive.
Coffee is $10 New Zealand.
Yeah.
So true. But in today's episode, we thought, let's just do a wrap up of the year. So we'll talk about our money and our business lessons from 2023. So we've both like gone away in our own time and thought about 5 that we're going to share. Have you done your homework, Vic?
I have.
Oh, good girl. But yeah, I think there's been like a whole lot of learning for both of us, personally and professionally. Maybe actually before we get into the 5 lessons, let's just do a year in review. Like, don't bore everyone with every single detail, but just give some highlights and lowlights of the year before we get into it.
Well, get comfortable. So get a cup of tea. No, so there's been a lot of big life changes for me this year.
Yeah.
So I think the 2 biggest ones, firstly, going full-time at the Curve.
Oh God, I kind of forgot.
Yeah, I know. I feel like I've been working on the Curve for years. Well, we have, but like, not full-time. It feels like so much longer than just February, which is a good thing, I guess.
I mean, is it? When people are like, oh, it's just been 10 years and it's flown by. Like, I don't feel like that.
Yeah. Personally, for me, it was always in the pipeline and I always wanted to get there and join you and be full-time, but financially we couldn't. And so finally getting there, not only from like a business perspective, but from a personal perspective was super awesome. And just having that purpose and drive and mission and focus, I don't know, it just makes work so much more interesting and so much more rewarding.
There was also a lot of tension, I think, for you feeling torn between, of course, you want to do a good job for your fund that you're managing, while also wanting to, you were kind of pulled in a million directions. So probably quite a relief to finally be like, okay, I can focus 100% of my energy.
Totally. Having a sole focus and just what we could achieve or what, just having those extra hours in the day. I was just like, oh, thank goodness. It's not like, oh yeah, I'll get that to you in the weekend, which is 5 days away because I don't have any time to do it. So yeah, no, that was awesome. And the other big one, moving to London, which is so funny because when Soph mentioned this, I was like, no, I quite like being in New Zealand. And then I was like, okay, I'll go for 4 months. Now I'm like, I don't want to go home.
I spoke to Vic yesterday and I was like, how are you going? She's like, I kind of miss London. I was like, yes.
Yeah. I don't need to say it's been easy because it hasn't. I think any move overseas, any move for a job or anything is, you're getting out of your comfort zone. There's going to be challenges. You move into a different city. Things are different. Friends are different. Living situations different. Commutes, just everything is different because you're in a different city. And so I think the trade-off of the opportunities that we've had in London, it's kind of the sacrifice you make, but it's also been super fun from a personal level as well. But then, coming home recently, I think has made me realize how important friends and family are and how you need to nurture those relationships as well, definitely. Because when you're living abroad, it's very easy for a few weeks, a few months to fly by and not keep in touch. So it's really important when I'm here to spend quality time with friends and family. So
I remember when I was younger and my mum would be like, oh, I haven't seen a friend in 5 years. I was like, you haven't seen them in 5 whole years? They're not your friend.
Yeah.
And now it's just like time goes so quickly. And I feel like I've just caught up with someone and it was 6 months ago.
Well, especially when everyone's busy. Everyone's got their own shit going on.
For sure.
Whether it's children or family or business or health. Yeah, it's almost like you just have to prioritize and make time and also but be a bit, I guess, accepting, like just realize that people are all going through different things. And Sophie, what about your year in review?
I was kind of similar to you. Like, remember when I was like, let's go to London for a few months? I kind of at this point got into like a bit of a groove in New Zealand too. Like I was really comfortable. I loved my flat. I was living with 2 girls that I was like really good friends with. It was so nice. And then it was kind of just like exactly what you said, that like mixing up the changing of pace and place and having to move and all of that stuff. It took me a while to kind of land here.
There was a moment before we left.
Oh my God.
So I was like, should we really go? I was like, girl, I'm a planner. I've been planning this.
I was literally like, would you still go if I didn't? Vic's like, no, yes, I'm going. I was like, okay.
Yeah.
I had a bit of a quarter life crisis in London for sure. The whole blowing out with my money and having to pull all of my funds out of my Sheezy's account. And, that was like a whole saga. The whole money reset, one of our courses was sort of born from that incident, which turned out to be quite stressful. Like there was zero financial planning from me.
You definitely did have steps in place in terms of your investment. You had investments, you had an emergency fund, all of that. It was just London's more expensive than we thought. Do you know what I mean? You have a plan in place, you have a budget.
No, but I didn't. I didn't have a budget or a plan. I hadn't actually done that, which is so ridiculous in hindsight. So I was kind of slowly eating away at that and just drawing things out every month and making no effort to look at what I was spending. And I've basically flitted away about 17K, which is like kind of ridiculous. No, it's not even kind of, it's extremely ridiculous, but a really good lesson. And I've like been slowly building up my emergency fund and things like that. But I'm definitely, I don't feel like I'm finishing the year being like, oh, all of a sudden I'm on a great financial situation. Like I'm still not. And that has been stressful. I'd be lying if I said it hasn't. I do think the sort of tail end of this year has turned around in terms of the beautiful home I'm living in London with the most amazing people. I love London as well. The diversity and the opportunity over here is like massively inspiring. So I feel like there's big things to come, both for us as people and as friends, but also as a business, which is exciting.
And I think you have to have those periods of what the fuck, so, like it's kind of, you've got to go through the shit sometimes to realize the good times are actually really fucking good.
Definitely. I just sometimes get a bit sick of being in and out of the shit, Sometimes I'm just like, can I just have like a bit of a stint of something that's a bit more stable just for a minute, Sometimes it's exhausting. But Vic, what was one big lesson that you learned about money or business this year?
One of the biggest lessons I've learned is how to live on a significantly reduced salary in one of the most expensive cities in the world. Going from earning nearly $300,000 to $100,000 is, pretty wild. And obviously with anyone in that situation, there's a lot of things you have to cut back on and things you can't afford and things you have to adjust in terms of your living situation. And I definitely felt that. I think in the early months, I was probably still living like I was on a $300,000 salary and just dipping into my savings, and then quickly realized, oh, this is not sustainable. Your savings don't go up, as much as you're spending them. So it was kind of okay, you need to be able to live on this salary and not dip into your savings because this is your new life.
And when you say savings, you mean investments, right?
Yeah. And so it was just a case of, I guess, having that conversation with myself. Do I really need this? Cutting back on spending on clothes, for example, selling clothes that I don't need rather than just keeping them because that extra income would be great. Things like having conversations with banks about, how I can go interest only instead of paying my mortgage and my interest. So then I've got extra cash. Little things like walking instead of getting an Uber.
Have you actually done that? I'm really impressed.
Gosh, yes. Yeah. Instead of getting an Uber, or like, do I need a drink with that? No, I can just have the food. All that kind of stuff adds up.
I have noticed that actually.
Or stuff like mainly around clothes and discretionary spending.
I think clothes is a really hard one. Someone actually messaged us about that on Instagram the other day saying, I'd love to have a conversation around how can I love fashion and clothes, but also not have blowouts, because I fully understand that. They're such massive items and they're an investment, and they're not necessarily something you save for, or all of a sudden I'm just like, blah, I'm going to spend all this money on clothes, and you're like, shit, I can't afford that. So I do understand that.
It's also, I've realized coming back to New Zealand, clothes that I haven't worn for 6 months, I'm like, why do I keep these? They're way better off in someone else's wardrobe. I'm going to put them on Trade Me, on Designer Wardrobe, and sell them. And I'd way rather get the money. And then it's like almost cleansing as well. I'm like, oh, I've got less shit.
Okay, so your first one is how to adjust your lifestyle so that you're not lifestyle creeping, basically.
Yes. What's your one, Soph?
Okay, emergency funds.
There for emergencies?
Yeah, honestly, that's not something I struggle with. It's not the idea of like only use this in an emergency. It's the fact that they are so important, A, and B, you always need 2 times more than what you think in your emergency fund.
Yeah.
I think, so I originally gave myself a $5,000 emergency fund, Guess how much is in my emergency fund now?
0?
So I have got $1,551.26.
That's amazing though. At least there's something in there. So that's I think you should not beat yourself up too much about that.
I know. I've had to pay a lot of medical expenses lately.
Mm.
And I think, although it's not an emergency, it was kind of an emergency.
Mm.
And sometimes when you get a specialist appointment, if you've been waiting for that for a really long time, you can't be like, is there a payment plan? Or can I do this another time? So that's definitely been a learning for me. I think just the emergency fund has been both a good thing, and it's the first time in my whole life that I've had one and actively thought, okay, leave it at 5,000, leave it at 5,000. But I think actually I probably need 8,000. And the thought of building it up again is actually really daunting, if I'm being honest. Like the fact that I'm going to go home for 2 months and not be paying rent, I'm like, oh, thank God I can build my emergency fund back up. But it kind of is a bit of a stressful situation to be in.
I think also it's like a realization of you can't plan for everything. So the more support and of a safety net that you can have, so when shit doesn't go to plan, the better.
Yeah.
But even the fact that you said, realize that 5,000 is enough, I need 8,000. Yeah, you can never plan for everything in life. But if you want to reduce that stress, having an emergency fund definitely helps with that.
Yeah. So if you know how I can build my emergency fund back up to 8,000 really quickly, any tips, tricks, always welcome. Okay, what's your number 2?
My number 2 is, gosh, I wish I had told my younger self about lifestyle creep. Kind of comes back to the first one around how I can live on a significantly reduced salary now. So why wasn't I doing that before? All these pay rises I got over my career, bonuses, all of that, I would have been in a much better financial situation now if I had known about lifestyle creep and not let it happen. Particularly when you're younger and you don't have a mortgage, you don't have all these really chunky expenses. It's like, that's a key thing to remember if you're listening and you're in your 20s. It's like so much easier to save money when you're younger. And it does mean that, the sooner that you can do it when you're younger, the less you have to save when you're older. And I think I just wish I'd known, yes, I did invest and I did save when I was in my 20s, but I could have done a lot more if I'd been a bit more conscious of my spending and a bit strict on what I spent my money on. Yeah.
Okay, that's a really good one. Okay, my next one is figuring out what your financial values are is where the magic happens. So for example, I just spent $700 on a 1-hour medical appointment, which I didn't think twice about. Okay, that's not true. I saw the invoice and I thought, holy moly. But I was like, okay, that's a no-brainer. Like I'm definitely, I need to pay for that, but B, also I want to pay for that. I wanted answers and I wanted to speak to someone. So that was really massive. But I think also then to think how easy it was to spend $700 on that appointment made me realize the times that I'm umming and ahhing about things, whether it be going out for dinner, whether it be a new whatever, it should be really obvious what feels good and what doesn't. And understanding your financial values, I think for me has been really massive. Like even the other night I was meant to go out for dinner. There was a bunch of people going out and I had this little inkling like, oh, I don't reckon you should go. Like you can't really afford this if it ends up being expensive.
Yeah.
Anyway, I am so glad that I did not go.
Yeah.
They spent like £100 on dinner. And there's just no way I could have done that. And I knew I had a bit of a feeling. And I think just following that, it's almost like you've got a bit of a gut when it comes to everything, not just love, but also like pay attention to how you feel when you're spending money, because it's going to be really obvious when you feel okay about it and really obvious when you don't, if you actually start to tune in. So I think for me, that was a really big one.
My third one kind of is a bit contradictory to the first one, but let me explain. My first one being I've had to adjust to living on a lower salary. I got back to New Zealand and had bills coming out my eyeballs. A little sub lesson of this is that, make sure all your communication is online, not in paper, if you're living overseas, because I came back to a mountain of mail. A lot of it was kind of flyers and stuff, but then there was a lot of parking ticket, gone to Bay Corp. Okay, now we're going to go take, and I was just like, oh gosh, for like a $35 parking ticket that I just didn't get. And then there was other ones like my insurance for my contents in my house, like little things like that. I'm like, oh shit, sorry. Anyway, the old me, that would have thrown me into a real tailspin. And I would have been like, oh my gosh, I have so many bills. How am I going to get through this? Which is kind of surprising when I would have been on a higher salary and that would have stressed me out. I think putting things in place and being on a lower salary and just being like, this is my life now, it hasn't really thrown me into a tailspin as much. And I've realized, okay, you might just have to say no to a few more things to get through this mountain of debt, but also just chip away at it and try to not let it consume you, try not to let it stress you out. And like all the learning that we've done over the year in terms of the money reset course, to go to certain things. Like I had a friend's lunch and I said, I actually made up an excuse that I was busy with work because I was too embarrassed to say that I couldn't go. And it's not something that it's not an excuse that I've had to use that often. So it kind of felt a bit foreign.
In terms of I can't afford it.
Yeah. It's not an excuse that I've had to say a lot, which I'm very fortunate. I know is a very fortunate situation to be in. And so I think now having those conversations, and even with New Year's, I had a whole bunch of friends going to this amazing house and I literally couldn't afford it. And I was like, sorry, I'm really sorry, I'm going to have to pull out.
Did you say it was because you can't afford it, or did you say another excuse?
Yeah, no, I did say with that one. But then I said for the lunch, I was like, it was $100 a head for lunch. And I was like, look, I've got meetings, I can't attend, which was partly true. But the big reason was that I was like, oh, that's just going to be a really expensive day. Then you've got alcohol on top of that. But then I'm like, why should I be ashamed to say that these are my friends?
I so get it though. It's a really funny and really emotional thing. Like I saw you getting teary just then even talking about it. And I don't know what it is, because the same thing happened to me the other day, like I was just saying with that dinner. And I didn't say I can't afford it. I was the same. I made an excuse up. And I did think at the time, this is really sad. Like it's really sad that we both work for the Curve. Like our whole thing is around transparency with money.
Yeah.
And here I am sitting in this like shame ball of having to make an excuse up because I don't want to say it, said I can't afford something. I just don't really know how to get through that. And honestly, that I think is, and I appreciate the fact you're acknowledging that this is like privileged. However, it's kind of reassuring for me that you can understand that feeling quite viscerally now because you've experienced it recently, because you probably haven't felt that for years and years and years, you know? Yeah, it's just a good reminder. Not everyone's in position to be able to just like keep up with the whatever, but B, also like everyone has their own agendas and things that they're prioritizing. And for you right now, you're prioritizing not your social life or going out for every meal.
Totally.
You just like can't do everything always. It's just the reality. You've got to pick and choose.
But it's also, it's kind of what you say about the Curve. It's like, we've got a financial education platform. We should have our shit together and be able to say yes to everything. And it's like, no, Vic, you don't have to be in that mindset. You can be in the mindset of like, no, I'm saving for this, or I'm spending my money on something else, not on my social life.
Do you feel like there's almost a perception to externally have your money sorted because of the fact that you're the money expert for the Curve? Is that kind of what you mean?
Oh, 100%.
That's so, I mean, I get it. Like, I'm not trying to say it's not fair enough, but it's
almost like I feel like if I'm like, I can't afford or I can't do that because it's too expensive. It's almost like, oh, of course you can afford it, Vic. You've always been able to afford it, and you run a financial education platform. Like, that's bullshit. It's weird. But I'm also like, imagine if I got behind on my mortgage and couldn't pay my mortgage, my house got repossessed, and I'm supposed to be a financial expert. Like, there's an added pressure of having my shit together.
I think the whole reason, and anyone that's listened to this podcast for a long time knows that we're always like very honest. It's something we try really hard to do. And I think right now you're not in a position where you're rolling in it, you know, and that's okay. Like, you're choosing your business right now over a $300,000 salary, and being able to be open about the fact that life's expensive and you can't afford everything. If anything, I think will be reassuring for people listening who are like, oh, Vic's got a shit sorted. It's like, she does, but she also can't do everything.
Yeah.
And we all go through phases. Like, I think it's really brave and important actually to admit, you know? But also I think both of us need to make a bit of like a pact to ourselves to also be honest when we can't afford something, rather than making an excuse up, because we shouldn't feel ashamed for saying, actually, it's not in my budget.
God, this is nice therapy session.
Yeah, you feeling good?
Yeah.
I'm like trying to figure out where I'm up to. Oh yeah, okay. You have to spend money to make money. Outsource work to make space for innovation. So this might seem a bit off piece. Like, what are you talking about? But I really, really never got this concept. And Vic, I remember you saying to me once, this is kind of cute. So I remember we were in a taxi on our way back from our Italian holiday, and we were talking, of course we were, about the podcast, about editing. And you were like, it's really important that you can outsource editing so that you have time to do other things. And I honestly remember feeling like, oh, if I'm not editing, like what value can I add to this business? Like I was like, isn't that my thing? Like, isn't that the thing that I'm like, people would pay me for?
Yeah.
And I think, the fact that you had confidence in me to be able to add value to the curve in other ways by outsourcing that. But also the idea of when you have your head above water more, so you're not kind of like wading in the weeds of something, you have way more perspective to think big picture about how to make more money. And I don't necessarily just mean for business. Like I think when you're so busy with family life or when you've just got so much going on, it's really hard to zoom out of a situation. And for me, from like a work standpoint, being able to be in a position where the business could outsource our editing to Emily, who we love, she's amazing, has made like the world of difference to me. And for what I realized I can add value in a business sense that hopefully in turn will make more revenue. And I think that it sounds like such a simple concept, outsource so that you can do more things. But it was honestly a fear of mine. Like,
it's funny because now Soph is firing me like so many emails and being like, hey Vic, have you done this? Have you done this yet? And I'm like, now I need to outsource.
Okay, on that, if anyone wants some freelance work, feel free to get in touch. Vic needs some help. Preferably someone who understands money and the economy and genuinely, victoria@thecurve.co.nz. But yeah, I think for me, that's been a really interesting and cool learning, because I think also in this, I don't know if this is going to be relatable for anyone that's like not in business, but I think when you're in a small business or a startup, you can get really bogged down on spending money because you're like, oh, we can't afford it. We can't afford anything. And it's really easy to want to like hold on to that sense of control, etc. But actually like the freedom that's given us to be able to look like, okay, how can the curve take over the world? Is like so much easier now that there's space to think. So I don't know. It was kind of like sometimes you need to spend money to make money, I think has been a learning for me.
I like that one. I think the other one for me was how important insurance is. And I think whether it's travel insurance, health insurance, anything. I mean, I've kind of known that insurance is important, but I think particularly this year, being on a reduced salary and, then having some health issues or, traveling and getting something stolen could really impact you financially if you didn't have insurance and you don't have a lot of extra disposable income. So for me, it was a real realization that insurance is super, super important. And it's so funny because I know a lot of people think this, and whenever you go traveling, you've spent a lot on flights, you've spent a lot on accommodation, and then you're like, oh, really? Do I need insurance? It won't happen to me. And then usually 9 times out of 10, it does happen to you. But also health insurance as well, I think is a really big one. I've had to use it a few times this year, and it's so key in terms of you just never know when your health's going to fail. And so it's really important just to have that, because if you're usually dealing with whether it's pain or anything like that to do with your uncomfortableness, and the last thing you want is having this financial burden.
Side note, we're just going to do a little shout out to our friends at R&P Insurance. This is not paid for. This is not like a sponsored plug. But if you don't know what to do with insurance and you're listening to this and you're like, oh God, I really know I need to get this sorted, look up R&P Insurance, because Rochelle and Philly are lovely, and they don't have to sell you anything, And
they don't do travel insurance or health insurance, but they do insurance, which is good.
Yeah. Okay. This one, I didn't even really know if I wanted to share it, to be honest. I'm not sure if you looked at my notes, but I've been avoiding this quite a bit. But basically, because I haven't fully unpacked this myself yet, I think I'm still learning, but I have had a medical diagnosis in the last couple of weeks, which is why I've spent a lot of money on doctors and things like that. Gosh, this is kind of heavy, isn't it?
Yeah.
Basically, oh my God, why am I finding this so hard? I'm normally so open about everything. Okay, I'm like avoiding the title that I see written. I'm just like talking around.
You want me to say?
Yeah, can you say my title, please?
Soph's title is Organization Saves You a Lot of Money. The ADHD Tax is Real.
Thank you. I have not fully unpacked this yet, and I'm definitely feel emotional about it. And it's been a really weird few weeks. But this year, when I had my financial blowout in the middle of the year, for anyone that's like followed the podcast or seen on socials, I basically got to the point where I kind of like had run out of money and had to borrow money from a friend. It was all very like embarrassing and childish, and I was like quite ashamed of the whole situation. Anyway, there's been like lots of things that I've kind of just been super frustrated at myself for, whether it be money or other stuff in my personal life. And I've just like Vic and I have had quite a few moments where she's like, what is wrong? And I'm like, oh, honestly, I don't know. I remember we were going to record that podcast one day and I just fully started crying before we recorded it because I honestly didn't know it was wrong. Anyway, so now kind of realizing that there is a reason that I struggle with a lot of things, and organization being one of them, especially with my personal life, has massively played into this idea of which I'm now realizing is called, and it's an actual thing, the ADHD tax. Like, literally the other day I accidentally transferred $1,500 into my old flat account and I had no idea I'd done it. And if my flatmate hadn't been a friend of mine and been like, hey, lol, what the fuck? You just transferred rent from a flat you haven't been in for 6 months. I'm really lucky that she told me because I genuinely wouldn't have realized. And like the amount of times I've forgotten to pay bills or all sorts of things and have incurred massive fines for it has actually been like financially super detrimental.
Yeah.
And so I think this is way more common than I realized. And there's a lot of people who messaged me back to that whole saga in the middle of the year with the whole like running out of money and it being super just like, what am I doing? So, there might be a lot of other people who are listening and actually can resonate with this, but I think having some kind of neurodivergence is and can be a really brilliant thing. And there's like lots of positive things I think that I'm trying to be grateful for when it comes to having a brain that works slightly differently. But at the same time, when it comes to finances, it's something that I inherently will always struggle with more than the average person. And I think like setting reminders, making lists, forcing myself to look at my accounts, all of these things that I haven't done up until now. And now that I understand why I've avoided them and why I've behaved a certain way, I'm like, okay, I can like start to put things in place to mitigate that. But if I think about the amount of money that I have like lost or wasted throughout my life based on disorganization when it comes to money as a cause of ADHD is like quite massive.
Yeah.
So I think it's just putting things in place for yourself and systems and being brave enough to like look at the situation, i.e. your bank account, and be like, okay, what do I need to do here? Because burying your head in the sand and doing what I did for 32 years is not conducive to a long-term flourishing financial situation.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that one, Soph.
I was so close to crying. That would have not been cool. I was like really felt myself being like, come on.
I think this kind of comes into my last one as well around how much I think this year I've definitely noticed. And I think it's a function of working with you, getting interesting guests on the podcast, just researching, attending events, all of that stuff. I think I've just realized how much my upbringing, my environment, my schooling, my friend group, where I've lived has impacted my beliefs, my morals. I don't know, like I just had never thought about it as much as I have this year, I think, around how conditioned we are by the environments that we grow up in. And maybe it's being in London and just seeing you could walk naked down the street and no one would give a fuck, like that kind of thing. And don't get me wrong, I love my upbringing and everything and my family and where I've lived and all of that. I just think it was kind of this light bulb moment this year of like, wow, the world's a big place and there is some fucking interesting people that look and function and so different to you. And how cool is it that you've been able to talk to them and interview them and learn from them and expand your horizons. And yeah, I just hope that for the world that more people can have a bit more of an open mind and be around people that can educate them and have a different view on things and look at things in a different light. And I think that's been a real eye-opener for me this year.
I love that. And I think also when it comes to money and privilege and perspectives and everything that we have learned by the amazing podcast guests that we've had this year, I think what you realize is, yes, you're right. Like society and your upbringing and your echo chamber and your life, of course, is going to dictate a huge amount of your views and opinions and
course.
things. Of course it is, but it's kind of up to us to look outside of that and really like seek out new
Totally.
ideas and new perspectives and ways of thinking and understanding that's broader than what you see in front of you, because we're super lucky, like through the Curve podcast, we've actively sought that out. And I hope that people listening have felt like they've learned alongside us too and had that sort of change of perspective when it comes to different things. But I also think it's up to us as individuals to actively be always learning, and I think that's such a good one, Vic.
Thank you.
Okay, my last one is just, it's fucking hard to invest regularly. You have to think of it as a necessity and like a fixed expense like rent. It takes 5 minutes to automate, but the difference that it's going to make for me in retirement by just putting $75 a week into my account is crazy. And at the moment, obviously 75 is all that I can afford. Like that is actually still a massive stretch for me. But I think that the thing I've learned is like, don't beat yourself up if you don't have much to invest right now. And if you take anything away from all of my rambles in this podcast, it would be please, 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 A, look at your accounts, and B, figure out how much you actually can take out each month as a fixed expense, not as an option, not as a maybe, but as like something that you have to pay for. And I think that mindset shift and knowing how much it is each month and just doing it as an automatic thing is so game changer. The money reset starts early next year. If you have no idea and that's overwhelming for you, and you're like, I have no idea how to even figure out how much I could do, it's fine. Like there's so many online resources. The time that you will spend figuring out how much you can invest regularly.
Yeah, it'll pay for itself multiple times over.
Yeah, like the half an hour you spend doing that will be like probably $1 million. It's just so worth it.
Yeah.
I feel like really vulnerable.
It's like emotionally draining. I'm like, oh.
I just don't feel like I brought any fun ones. Mine's pretty serious. I would actually love if you're listening to this and you feel like you want to send us a message and let us know what you feel like you've learned this year. If you've had any big revelations about money, about finances, about investing, it would be really cool to hear other people's, and also any feedback on like if you feel like you learned something from our ones. Because if not, we won't do this podcast again.
Yeah.
It's like the first time I've planned an episode and everyone's just like, please don't do that.
You were back to Vic to plan the episodes.
Yeah. Stay in your lane.
Well, I hope everyone's had a great 2023.
Yeah, same.
See you in the new year.
Yeah, see you in the new year. Oh, next week we're just going to do like a best of. We've actually chosen all of our favorite bits from the year. And we're going to do that just to like, in case you've missed any, so that you can kind of like be like, oh yeah, I forgot to listen to that episode and go back and do it.
Other than that, yeah, we'll see you in 2024.